Unfortunately, I have to do that now as he's a pastor, and I get to feel a little bit bad about heckling a pastor. So what I have to say today, I don't really have anything really good to share with you. It's not one of those things that we'll talk about things, you'll be left here feeling like, man, I really feel good about the state of things and how my children are exposed to the internet and what they're exposed to. So one of the things Dave said is, I do teach for Anderson University. I teach cybersecurity, and somehow I lost my notes that were on my page here. Yikes. But anyway, the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis in cybersecurity is that we are trying to protect individuals' privacy, right? That's the biggest thing that we're trying to do, is to secure that organizations are only sharing out content they want to share out, anything that they are charged with protecting that's well protected and is secured. Is this muffling me at all on the audio? We're okay, okay. And the nature of the problem was that early internet protocols weren't really built to guarantee any sort of privacy, right? The system was, at the time, that we had this two-party system. It was between the Department of Education and the government. And organizations like colleges would receive institutional money from the government to provide research back to the government. This two-party system had an inherent level of trust because it was basically a tin can with two people on both ends that trusted each other. Fast forward that to 40 years now, and we have inherent problems with privacy that are being addressed and being fixed. The problem with which, though, is that some of the things that we relied on to protect our children and to protect schools from seeing content that was not for that age group are starting to fail. So the other side of this problem is that also devices are seen as private property, right? I mean, this is my private device. I use an iPhone because Apple has taken a stance on privacy that I appreciate, and as a cybersecurity professional, advocate for, except when it comes to my own kids, right? Like, their reasonable expectation of privacy is non-existent as far as I'm concerned. But yet, I'm very thankful for all you teachers, and I'll go into a little bit of a personal story here in a bit. But the kids are receiving now iPads and Chromebooks at a much earlier age. And the technology hasn't necessarily always kept up with how we apply controls to making sure that students only see the things that we want them to see, right? Or that they don't see things that are outside of maybe where their ethics, where their moralities have developed out to a certain point. So there are tools that we can suggest, and I can suggest some, and I will suggest some. But the problems are that the tools have to often compete with the manufacturers and changes within the industry on how industry also maintains security and privacy. So back in the day, schools used to have content filters like light-speed rockets, and these worked out fairly well. These devices would look at the URLs that were flowing between a device and the internet, and would pick up on certain patterns of content that was previously identified or flagged as being adult or being some sort of violent content. Unfortunately, now these content filters are less effective because the mandated use or the overuse of, or I shouldn't say overuse, the continued progressive use of cryptography and things like URLs make it impossible to actually filter out the content based upon what the content is. The other challenge is that using protocols like DNS, which is the thing that the internet relies on to work, this is how you will ask for a website like Google and come back to a Google website. Now all that's also encrypted and running over HTTPS. So we've had two ways the content filters could have possibly picked up on malicious content or violent content or pornographic content that are now starting to fail. And they're starting to fail because of the increased demand for privacy out in the world, except, in my house where they have no expectation of privacy. So it gets to be complicated. And the things I've had to deal with, the things I've had to use, haven't necessarily been technical controls, which make it easy, right? Technical controls, me installing this application on my phone means that I get to, take a breather from being cybersecurity guy at home and at the office and, for the university. It means that I get to have a breather and I can rely on this one thing to do its job. Only the problem is it doesn't always do its job very well. Or my kids can go onto Reddit or some other forum and figure out how to disable this device. Like, how do we get around this thing? And all that content is easily available. So anything that I could tell you that you could possibly use or install on your phone is something that could easily be bypassed with a very quick search on Google on how to disable. So that's one problem, right? It's that we have these things that we're using in our everyday lives that we're modeling to our kids. I have a reasonable expectation of privacy. No, you can't use my phone. And here's the reason why. Here's X reason why. And that they think that then they have a school iPad and we haven't necessarily modeled those same things. So it's a little bit of an incongruent message, right? It's a little bit of a mixed message. Students aren't necessarily sure with where they stand on using these things. So I don't know. And I invite any of you, if you have any questions, like you're struggling with this right now, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it here because I would like to know some of the things you're struggling with because there are different struggles than what I'm struggling with. So just understand that anything that I could possibly recommend to you as far as a technical control on a phone, on a device, on a computer, will never replace the conversation that you can start having now with your children on ethics and morality. One of my kids, he loves music, and I love that he loves music because I'm getting him into my music, right? Which is techno, which is a lot of electronic stuff. And it's shockingly clean. I don't know if any of you remember the artist Plum, like the Christian artist Plum. Well, she has this entire catalog of techno stuff that she has done with very prominent techno artists. It's absolutely amazing. And I can recognize those lyrics for what they are, but anyway, that's aside. So he's getting into that kind of stuff. So one day, he told me about him signing up for Spotify on his school Chromebook. And that shocked me. And it shocked me for a couple of different reasons. One is I know for him, in order for him to sign up for that service, he has to go ahead and agree to certain terms and conditions, right? He has to basically say that he is not a 10-year-old, right? He has to go ahead and ethically lie to this banner. I mean, you don't see it as a lie because he's interacting with this thing that is non-sentient. It's not an actual human. But he has to purport to be someone he is not, right? He has to go ahead and say, yes, I am 16 years old. And he did this within his school environment. And this, again, for teachers, like, God bless you. Like, I don't know how I would be able to manage all of these things that you're currently managing with all the different services. And I know that this is as much of a question for you as it is for me on how we control these things. And so he signed up for the service, and then one evening, I get an email from his principal, and the email was sent to me about 11:45 at night, where I saw it at 11:45 at night because I was up late grading. And it said, we have received a notification from some content filters on his Chromebook. He was looking at some inappropriate content. And 11:45 at night, I like 0 to 120 beats per minute, go through the roof to where I'm barging into his room and waking him up, and I'm like, where's the Chromebook? And so then I proceeded to spend the next hour doing some things with forensics in order to try to recover the search history and figure out what happened. Like, I see what triggered the notification, but I wanted to see exactly what landed him here. Like, what were the steps that got him to this point? Well, it turns out it was fairly innocuous. It was fairly something that, he was interested in a certain song. He did a search for a certain lady, and one thing led to the next in that as the search filter, or as the search engine built out what it thought he was typing, it landed him to something that was absolutely not what he was looking for. But he's 10. He doesn't necessarily know how to spell everything the right way, especially with artist names. So we had a conversation the following day, and I pulled him aside and I said, we're going to have a conversation about what I found last night. And this kid's petrified. One, I'm 6'6", so I'm already a little intimidating, right? Two, I'm his dad, and I know cybersecurity, and so he's basically in a bad spot, and he kind of knows it. So we have this conversation, and I list out the things that he violated. First of all, he violated my policy at the house for having devices in his bedroom. Second of all, it was a policy that he shouldn't have had this device in his bedroom after hours anyway. And the third is that he essentially broke a covenant with God as far as the fruits of the Spirit on lying, and did something that he wasn't supposed to do, whether he sees it as that or not. And he's still young, he's still building out where his morals are, where his ethics are, and a lot of that's coached by me. And he didn't see that as being a problem, right? Like the little inside voice in him didn't say, hey, you're actually doing a lie here. It was like, hey, sweet, I can get music whenever I want, which is fine. Except he didn't do it within the confines of, talking to me first, and let's get him a proper way to access this content with a account that I can also monitor. If he wants to do this, like as a parent, we can talk about different ways he can do that safely. But he went around that. Some of it was not necessarily intentional, So we have the conversation. Myself, I struggled with a pornography addiction from an early age. At a young age, I had access to the internet. We lived out in the country. My parents, were doing stuff during the day, and I'm doing stuff online all the time. And it wasn't necessarily one of those things that I just kind of accidentally landed in some place, right? I went ahead and I was quizzical, was interested, and I went to these places, and covered my tracks up pretty well for the most part. But it's something that stuck with me my entire life, and it's stuff that I don't want my kids to have this baggage that they have to deal with for as long as I have, which is close to 45 years now. Well, I guess minus the age that I was at, so 30 years. So we had the conversation. I told him some of my backstory. I was honest with him, building up this relationship so that we have a level of accountability between the two of us where we can have these open conversations, that there's no shame in this, right? So something that was beautiful and created by God for us to enjoy here, and for the system to properly work, there's no shame in that. Like I understand where he's coming from completely. And told him that, if you have any questions, feel free to let's talk about these things ahead of time. I'm 40 years old and I still have questions. Who can know some of these things, right? And so then I told him if he does have real questions, go ask his mom. No, I didn't say that. No, I didn't say that at all. But anyway, so he broke our policy. He understands that there was something that happened wrong, and we didn't include a lot of shame in this for him, right? Because shame will just keep him from sharing with me again, right? I want to keep this open communication with him and maintain that close contact and have that rapport with him so that we always have this conversation, regardless of how awkward it might seem at the time. So in the past, schools did things like URL filtering, they had content filters, and they worked for the most part. Nowadays with iPads and Chromebooks, they have other plugins, other tools. And I'm very thankful for that tool that existed on Chrome. My fear is that though that same tool doesn't exist on iOS. And the reason for that is, again, Apple's hard stance on privacy. Like anything that could be used to protect my kids and provide what they're saying in text or an email or on URLs is also something some spouse could use on another spouse in order to control them, which is not at all what any manufacturer or any spouse would want, right? So the problem's complicated. And the problem is often a catch-up game between the manufacturers who manufacture these products and the developers of things like iPhones, like Android devices. With Android, it's a little bit easier to do things because it's a little bit more of an open platform. So you might find more functionality in Android devices for your kids if you do choose to give them some sort of a smartphone device or anything like that. The way that the Android is designed to be more open, right? With Apple, it's designed to be more closed. The reason behind that we won't get into, but just understand that there's more challenges with devices like the iPhone and the iPad than there are with the Chromebooks. So it's a constant battle between privacy and transparency. And I love my privacy, and I fight for privacy and protocols, for cryptographic standards that ensure that people can't eavesdrop on communications. But it's tough as a parent because these same things can also be things that my kids know how to get around. And all that information is made available to the internet on these applications like Covenant Eyes or Circle or Safer-Text, which might be great applications and they might work fairly well. Don't expect them to always work well, and don't expect them to work the same way all the time, because manufacturers of iPhones and Android devices send out updates and standards change throughout the internet. The other thing I would caution you against too is some of the content and some of the places that they go that you would think would be the most safe. Things like Google, things like YouTube can also lend themselves to being the most dangerous. Things in the past that have happened, like the, who remembers the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, right? And things like that can then lead themselves to a teen recording themselves, posting on YouTube, challenging friends, can then lend itself to having some of the most vile comments on those YouTube channels and those YouTube postings, those YouTube videos that you would ever expect to see. You would never want your 12-year-old, 14-year-old be exposed to what some of the things that I've seen said in looking through some of the search histories of search patterns and that on the internet. So some of those things like outfit of the day or routines, here's my yoga routine or here's my morning routine. Watch out for that kind of content. Make sure that you're supervising this content before your teen, before your kid ever posts anything on YouTube. Make sure that you're reviewing the content while they're doing it. Because one thing leads to another, and all of a sudden that they have landed themselves into a conversation with a stranger who is advocating them to go to a place that's not YouTube, and to you might look completely clean, right? To have a conversation, and invariably not a conversation you would want them to have. So watch out for things like Google. Watch out for things like YouTube. Google has a thing called Safe Search, which you can turn on, but it's also something that can be easily turned off. So all these things that we can turn on can also be easily turned off. Parental controls on phones also can be easily turned on, easily turned off, where you're essentially locking your child into a certain program to be unlocked, right? Because they can figure out how to unlock that. These locks, if you were to put this in a type of analogy, essentially this is the safety lock on your medicine bottle, right? What age were your kids at when they could possibly get open that lock, right? It might be effective for 10, might be effective for 9, but about 12 and 13, these locks are really no longer that effective, right? Because the kids are smart enough to figure out how to get these locks open. So you really have to have a two-way conversation. You have to set the stage for open communication with your child, because they're in a land that is not anything like the land that we currently are in, but it's an entire land. Even though they're 2 feet away from you, they're in a space with strangers that you would never expose them to in any other circumstance. And so you really have to be aware of this, aware of their conversations. So one of the programs that I've looked at, and if you've used these and if you've had success with these, let me know. I don't advocate for these programs. Again, I don't advocate for any of these programs, honestly, because they don't solve the problem of the communication between and the relationship building and the rapport and the accountability. Those are all things that you have to do that these tools can't do for you. But if you wanted some insight and you wanted to use these tools to help bond that connection to help enforce your policies, one of those tools for iPhone and iOS is called Circle. And I've read good things about it. I have not actually used it myself. Again, my kids are just now starting to enter that age where we're having to deal with these things. And they don't have any devices we supplied to them ourselves. Like they have their school devices, and we have set a very strong policy that this is a school device. I do not want you playing games on this. I do not want you looking at anything on this other than only the things that your teacher has put forth. But they still fight me on that because they still see this as their device and they want to use it how they want to use it. And that's just a problem, but when we've had to deal with that. The other is Safer-Text. So of all the different avenues we can have strangers talk to our students or talk to our kids that we are not completely aware of, Texting is one of them. Email is another. And then also things that they post content on things like YouTube or social media. Some of those are really hard to track, right? But for the mobile devices, you can use Safer Text to track text messages, and you can use Circle essentially as a content filter that tracks and makes sure that, that they don't go to a website that they shouldn't go to. Has anyone used these, Safer Text? So tell me, how do these work for you? What are some of the things you run into?
We use Circle at home. But it's only helpful at home. It's
Right.
not downloaded onto their device. It's a box that sits in our home and it runs between wherever the internet runs.
Yeah.
And then when it comes out. So it's great and we love it. I know you guys have used it too, Henry. We love it, but it is only helpful in the house.
Yeah.
Once they leave, they work. It's so you set it up on your phone and everyone that comes into the house, if they want to get on our internet, we have to let them on. So even our kids' friends, when they come over, they're in our circle. So their devices, they're not looking at things that I've blocked on that.
And you can choose whole categories
Yes.
that just shut down, so that you can't access certain platforms and you can't access certain
Apps.
apps and then you can also put time parameters on it, and you create one profile per person. It has a lot of pluses than negative. If you unplug it, it does have a self-contained battery, so it keeps working. But eventually that battery dies, and it notifies you, but that's been,
Yeah, we keep our boxes in our bedroom.
Yeah. And if you have a device that then connects to AT&T or some cellular network, does it then protect that device still, or is it only?
and
Okay, all right.
so we use it on our Chromebooks.
Yeah.
And on our
Yeah,
iPhones.
every
Okay.
Wi-Fi device that comes into my home goes onto our server.
Okay. But as soon as it's off of Wi-Fi, then
Well, yeah. Yeah, so
Right.
if they switch to data.
Right.
So if someone has data and they switch to data,
then it's off, right?
it doesn't cover it.
It's just a little box, it's about this big, and it costs, it's a one-time price of like $100.
Yeah,
And then
it's a Disney Circle. It's a Disney product.
it's not anymore.
Oh, is it?
They changed it, but it's Circle, it's $100, and you can upgrade so that it goes with you for a subscription fee.
Okay. And so the go with you would be when you turn it off and go into data mode, then it would still work, or is that okay? So yeah, so some of these things, that's good. Thank you. I've not actually played around with those yet. You'll find that these things kind of come in and come out of phase, and some of them work better for a while than others, and then it turns out to be not that case anymore. And it's really hard for the technology and the companies that are doing the content filtering in order to keep up with advances in technology. We won't go into all those different advances in cryptography or DNS because it surpasses the scope of what we're trying to talk about today. I don't want to confuse you. But just understand that there is a constant cat and mouse game between these manufacturers who make these products and technology and how it's being used in the world. And sometimes they do better, and sometimes they do worse. And in my experience, they've always been just a little bit lacking. Yeah, yeah,
I'll notice that they're all on this one certain app or website, and so I send a message up to our IT person, and they filter it, and then the kids a week later have found something else.
yeah.
We're
Or
always trying to play catch up, and then parents come in and they're very angry with us.
right. And you were just handed this, right? I mean, that's not you can't. It's hard to control. It's a hard thing to control. I understand why it's being done. I understand why the technologies are being pushed into, but some of that is not always coupled with the proper parenting that needs to go ahead of that before they get those devices. So that's good. Thank you. Yeah.
Really
Yeah.
And that is going back to when they're really young.
Yep.
You know, really thriving at home. And so many of the kids, you ask them, you know, if they, for an email, don't you have to be 13?
Yes.
Okay.
For a lot of services, yes.
Right, and just, you know, in order to have a certain app or whatever, you have to be age 13. But you have parents all the time signing up their kids, lying, saying that that child, and I'm blown away about how many parents allow their kids on Facebook and they lie
Yeah.
about the age
Yep.
of their child.
Yep.
I mean, parents did that. And so, but teaching this really early on, that's an ethics issue.
Yes.
A morality issue. I mean, even when you're, you know, going into a park and you say, well, you just turned, you know, 13, and so, you know, we'll just tell them you're 12 and we'll save, you know, $30.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
Right.
You know, that's ethics and that's morality, and while that would be really nice to save all that money,
Right.
the bottom line is that's ethics and morality. So it starts
Yeah.
really young.
Yes.
And train them that this is, no, that's unethical
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah, and you know, for his age, a lot of those neural pathways to think in that certain way, you know, haven't been built out yet. He hasn't been exposed to those kinds of ideas. So really getting him to understand that this is what's happening, this is what you're doing when you do that, and yeah, yeah,
My 6-year-old was so excited when he found out, Papa, I have an email address.
yeah,
What?
And it's blocked. You can't get emails from other, it's blocked.
in some cases,
Parents that are signed up, they can't.
there was a recent case in Marion where I think that was not the case either, that over those school communications, there was some inappropriate behavior between a staff and a student. And I don't know, I don't know enough about, back when Marion was first looking at putting out some of these devices in the one-to-one program, I had some conversations with them. They had some conversations with me about, we don't know what we're doing yet. We don't have the infrastructure put forth in order to do this on scale. And that's a lot of the problem, is that these apps, you might see these apps like Safer, Circle, and you're thinking, well, why can't the schools do something like this? Well, the problem is it doesn't scale easily. They don't have the administrative capabilities to do that on a very wide range. So with the capabilities that they do have, though, and are getting, seems to be for mobile device management, things like that, are working better. I know you guys recently had some benefits of that, of having be able to track that kind of information. But I don't know to what level of maturity that has happened on a whole out large scale.
We, as teachers, we use two programs, Jamf and Apple Classroom.
Uh-huh.
When the kids walk into our room, we can control a lot more of what they're doing. But I'm going to tell you, I don't use them.
Yeah.
They are so user-unfriendly
Yeah, they're very cumbersome.
that it would take me several hours to set up just one class, and I have 7.
Yeah.
Just one thought that I had, for those of you that are with kids that don't have technology yet or aren't masters of it, if you find your safety protocols or like a circle device or whatever, I wish that had been available when we tiptoed into this,
Uh-huh.
because our kids know that that's an add-on that can be removed.
Yes.
But if your little kids might not ever really have the opportunity to know, the router and the circle filter aren't together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there are very easy ways to defeat these things. So once they get to about the age of 12 or 13, they're going to be able to search Reddit, find out ways to disable these programs, whether it's Covenant Eyes on a computer, whether it's an app on an iPhone or Android device. Nothing is foolproof.
And one point, sorry.
No, please.
With the Chromebooks, the school's filters, and I can speak for Oak Hill, ours are doing pretty decent at school, but everything we apply at school is null and void at home.
Yeah.
And with a Chromebook, as a parent, I can't add something
No.
to the Chromebook. So
And even as a cyber professional, like the forensics, like the data forensics that I can do on many devices, Android, iOS, or Windows or Linux or whatever, does not translate the same way into a Chromebook. Like a lot of those pathways still aren't quite developed out for me to have that kind of access into those operating systems because it's all essentially just all on a chip, right? It's all kind of there. So it makes it very complicated to go through and get search history for something that is not owned by you, but is used by your kid. And so that was a bit of a challenge. But yeah, like you said, it's
And I just bought the little, there's like boxes.
mhm.
So I have them all in the house. It makes the Wi-Fi better, but it also adds a filter directly to the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, good.
So, and I can set up profile, like there's all kinds of things I
Yeah.
can do just from my phone. But what I did on all of their devices is I downloaded what's called Family Link.
Uh-huh.
And so I control it, and then anything they get into, like I have to put their age in there, so it
Yeah.
filters anything, that isn't rated, because everything has to be rated on all.
Yeah.
And then there's certain apps that it won't let them download at all.
Uh-huh.
Like asking permission to download.
And it wouldn't shock me if some of those start stopping to work or begin failing, because as we move to things like DNS over HTTP and HTTPS for our traffic, like those kind of devices are not meant to intercept that kind of traffic in order to decrypt it. So so expect those kind of things to kind of start failing, because unless I have compromised the security on the host, anywhere between that, whether it's my router or whether it's any point in between, will not be able to intercept that traffic until it arrives at its destination. So one of the things that they do at schools is they install a certificate on each one of the devices that allows the proxies, like the Lightspeed rockets or whatever, to be able to decrypt that traffic. So they're essentially breaking the cryptography and breaking those connections in order to intercept the data. And those work, but those only work when you are on the site, because it's not going to be able to use those same cryptographic schemes or those same cryptographic certificates in order to decrypt that traffic anywhere other than at the school. In the ways that the devices are doing it also for that are kind of the old school ways where they're looking at the DNS information, which is the host names. Well, it sometimes works, it sometimes doesn't, but it doesn't work for Google if you're searching for images, unless it's somehow rewriting the filter or rewriting the URL for Google to enforce safe search. So there's all these different holes that it's just like plugging holes in a dam with your fingers. It's about ready to break. It's very, very complicated and not meant to be a long-term solution, because as we push for privacy for corporations and for the internet, it's just going to mean that privacy gets to be more complicated down the road.
So is there any way you could track, like, when the circle fails or the favorite text, like, when they fail?
Oh, that's a
Is there a way to track?
That's a great question. So what's our indicator of whether or not this control that we've put forth is actually working? And what I would say is you have to establish your own baseline. If you notice that baseline changes, then something is up. If you notice that all of a sudden you would normally see your child hitting a certain amount of URLs, like good or bad, and all of a sudden they drop off, that's an indicator that has failed. So look for patterns of anomalies in behavior or use to identify whether or not that device is not working the way that it should be. Maybe you grab the device. Maybe you try to go to casino.com, right, where that's a fairly innocuous website, but one that gets picked up easily for gambling. So go to something like that and see if it triggers. And if it does, then you know that it's still working. Try to, I hate to say this, but try to do something on Google to search for things that, you would expect them to be found, But you have to be careful with that too, because you don't want to, leave some sort of artifact that your child then finds. So it's complicated, right? How do you test to make sure that these things are actually doing their job? It's like electric fence. You just go up and touch it. But anyway.
The other side of this is, even if you have the perfect software that tracks what's going on, and I don't think it exists, but like we're saying, the problem I found is, even with the one we were using is, okay, sure, I can see text, sure, I can see some history there, but for me to sit and follow that history of those
Right.
It's pages and pages of text and stuff.
Yeah.
And most of it's just stupid stuff. You have to sit there and read for hours to see what's going on.
Or maybe it doesn't even match a simple word. Maybe it's an emoji. What does this emoji mean, right? So that doesn't necessarily translate to a search filter or to a filter of text, but it's still something you have to look out for. It's a full-time. Yeah. The other thing that you have to be careful of too is that whether or not these are connected to a wireless access point is that they are constantly probing out information about the device and throwing it out into the ether. And so anyone can, pick up on characteristics of this device by listening to that information. Even if it's not connected to a network, it's still sending out data, trying to connect to networks it knows about or remembers. And that can also expose details about your child in certain ways, whether it's Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. Yeah.
One thing that we did, is because my husband was in IT for 40 years, so, he knew all the ins and outs and, and of course it's changed throughout the years.
Yeah.
But, it was a really big deal when we gave our kids, access to the internet and social media and all that. And so I developed, we had a contract with them. So it's very clear, these are the expectations of what we, we expect of you. And that, for instance, even for all the homework that they were doing on their
Yeah.
laptop, it had to be in a certain area, like an open area, okay? And then they were not to have it in their bedrooms, that they had open study areas where they could, see all of it.
Yeah.
Also, at night, all technology gets docked.
Yep.
Okay, so it all gets docked, so they're not getting texts in the middle of the night or, at 1 a.m. when some parents aren't making their kids go to sleep and they're sending texts and calls and all that.
Yeah.
So we have a clear contract with the kids, that this is the expectations.
Yep.
And that it was like a really big deal. We believe that you're mature enough to, be able to use this and that, it's based on trust and integrity and all that. So having clear guidelines with that. And then also, clear consequences, if we
Yeah.
happen to, when you, as you pointed out in the very beginning, you have no privacy.
No privacy.
Sorry that you have no privacy. And the same thing is with my husband and I. We have each
Right.
other's passwords, we have no privacy. So, let's squash that right from the get-go.
Yep.
But, then if we happen to check it and find that you have been someplace inappropriate, then you've lost it for, X amount of time. And we said if you accidentally click on something that leads you somewhere,
Tell me.
come and tell
Yep.
us right away so that we know that this was not intentional, And so it was like I guess like most are far behind as far as we did not let our kids have, my older ones, they didn't get, internet cell phones until they were 18. They're right before they started college, okay? And then Elizabeth, we didn't allow her to have a internet cell phone, I think until she was almost 16, 15, I think is when it was. It's like everybody else had one. It's like, I really don't care.
Yeah. Yep.
Because it wasn't, I didn't think she was mature enough, but I know all the things that can happen out there.
Yeah.
The other thing is, as a church, I want to encourage people that sometimes we start kids, like we say, okay, for some of our junior hires, like all the announcements are on Facebook, just, go to Facebook and find it, or we've emailed all the stuff. So sometimes we're encouraging, even in the churches, the kids to get on the
Yeah.
internet
Yep.
and social media before they should be.
Yeah.
Okay, in my opinion.
Yep.
All right, and so I think it's really important, again, going back to, integrity and morality and ethics.
Yeah.
Teaching that early on, because you can make yourself nuts, trying to track things down. And I realize for many of us it's too late as far as, the only thing we can do is say, we went to this workshop, some things that really came home to us were these, and I realized that maybe we didn't go over these enough.
Yeah.
And that maybe even I violated them sometimes.
Yeah.
By, saying that you were, a certain age and you weren't a certain
Right. Yeah. And so that really goes back to the indicators that you have as parents are patterns of behavior in your student, patterns of behavior in your child, And when those patterns of behavior change, then it's time for you to start looking towards what might be the cause for that change. No one can pick up on those soft indicators like you can. But if you notice that if you have implemented some sort of control or filter and the pattern of use changes, or you notice different things are showing up when they shouldn't be, or you should be expecting things to show up and they're not, that's a time that should trigger for you to go ahead and check on these things, make sure they're still working. So, all right. Well, if you have any questions for me, I don't have any slides. Okay. Yeah.
So how do you, like, I have a son that's been and obviously he's in basically his last year at home. And he's a kid, doesn't really do a lot of, things that, I'm pretty tech savvy, so I keep an eye on it. But how do you balance the level of, he's going to be on his own soon, I want him to be ready for the world outside when he has complete freedom of his device,
Yeah.
to where he's at now and letting him know that we do trust him with his, because he's going to be on his own soon anyway.
Yeah.
Obviously we've been having these talks with him for years and years.
Yeah.
And years. He's a kid that has a lot of integrity, but
Yeah.
I just worry about that transition.
Yeah.
Period from 17 to 18 to also where it's kind of like when a lot of kids, they go off to college and then
Yeah.
they've lived a sheltered life and then all of a sudden
Yeah.
because
And that's some of the reason. So if some of that also is the reason why a lot of colleges have gotten away from trying to do content filtering on the campus. Is that A, it's a constant cat mouse game. B, it doesn't scale well. And C, it's the amount of data we're pushing through border devices for internet at colleges and universities has exponentially increased. So a lot of these devices are not meant to capture all that traffic, do all these filtering for things at that large of a scale, or they don't scale well as easily as they possibly could. And yeah. Anyway, I don't know what the answer to that is, but in the universities have approached it from an aspect of we're going to help set up accountability groups for students that do have or want to change, because if they don't want to change, because that desire to change has to start, in the student, and if they don't have that desire to change, they will find all sorts of ways to get around anything to find out whatever they want to find out. So,
Yeah, that's what, I've gotten 5 kids out the door. So
Yeah.
I've got one left in the house, so I can tell you what we did. And that was the senior year, I definitely started laxing up rules.
yeah,
And so in particular, the second semester and the summer before they went off, they were allowed to have their technology, and it might have even been in the fall. They were allowed to have their technology in their room. They were allowed to, stay up later. They didn't have to, I think it was the second semester senior year, they didn't have to dock their phones because of the fact that that's exactly correct, because so many kids, they were in these tight,
Yep.
All this regiment, and then they're on campus.
Tight constraints.
Ball State or even at Indiana Western,
Yep.
wherever, and all of a sudden, they get to do everything they want to do.
Right.
Okay, and so I thought I would rather have those conversations,
yeah,
and back off them their senior year, because that's our job as parents, that we want to get them to be independent and make good decisions. And I kept reiterating, you know what, we're not gonna be checking your computer.
No.
But my husband told me, said, but if your computer dies and I have to clean that thing up, he goes, I'm gonna be pissed.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm ticked off,
So I might.
I said, don't expect me to, spend hours and hours cleaning up your computer because you've done something stupid. We've tried to teach you morals and ethics. So absolutely,
Yeah.
your senior year, while they're still in the house, I definitely believe in
Yeah.
backing off, because otherwise, and I've taught college, I've been a college professor for over 20 years too, so I've dealt with that on the other side as well. And that, some kids just absolutely, go nuts, crazy. Well, and some parents won't let their kids stay
Right.
until they're 18. Well, we made, Elizabeth had to be, all of our kids had to be 16 before they could date, because we wanted them in the house where we could see and help guide them
Yeah.
along
protocol. Yeah, and that's one of the things we did with Henry too. Actually, I shouldn't say his name on this. This is going to be recorded, but with Henry, we'll go ahead and say it now. I loosened up the controls a little bit on him. I gave him a later bedtime, and we started hanging out more together in the evening. We now watch BattleBots. He has a later bedtime. We're starting to build those channels of rapport, of accountability, where we can have any sort of conversation in this setting with no one else around. And that's helped him. So for your 17-year-old, I would suggest helping them to find accountability partners now, even if there's no problems, right? That doesn't mean that in the future that not having that having that accountability partner will be beneficial. So help them right now, if it's no longer going to be you, is that accountability. Help them to build those same structures with other people. Maybe it's their youth pastor, maybe it's a friend, But I would definitely help them to build maintainable structures that can translate after they leave the house. All right, well, I will get off the stage here and let Dave. Yeah.
What about, parents' responsibility? We have a 3-year-old one, we're not.
Right.
But as far as parents' responsibilities, we need that, like here,
Yeah.
parents who, we have a cell phone basket, all the phones go in here.
Yep.
for dinner,
Yep.
And because your kids can't be on your phone after 8, but mom and dad are sitting on the couch on their phones.
Yep. I would heavily encourage you to model the patterns of behavior that you expect them to show as well. Whether that's turning off the phones at a certain point. I mean, I understand that everyone works and everyone receives, late emails and stuff like that. And that's how I found out about my son. So I'm not going to tell you to not look at the technology, but use it in moderation, as though you expect them to use it in moderation as well. Don't disconnect from them from a human side because they're going to connect with someone else on a digital side. Okay, so that's the danger.
My story right now is, my father and his wife bought these tablets. They bought them Amazon Fire tablets
Okay.
2 years ago.
Yep.
My kids are now 6 and 5. So since they've been 4 and 3, they've had these tablets roughly. I have locks on them,
Good.
so they can only be on the Amazon Kids
Uh huh.
portion, and then I have it set so it's their age restriction. And then I also have it set so it's a timer. So
Yep.
at 7 p.m. this is going to turn off, and you will have 1 hour to turn it off until bedtime. And no one's pretty much at home.
Yeah.
I got the tablets back last weekend after they've been there, and my stepmom had gone in and removed everything. So it's like, does anyone struggle with the fact of you set these rules and you live by these rules, and then
Yes. Yeah.
they go somewhere and it's like all of this is thrown out there, and so then I'll be back and forth with my kids and they haven't been able to use their tablets
Yeah.
because, well, you guys were on your tablets until 2 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
Because Gigi decided that the tablet didn't need to have a timer and.
Yeah. Or
Right, so it's like.
it also could be.
My kids wouldn't be going back to TV.
Yeah.
I was just like, you respect my rules.
Yeah.
It's the same problem with going to a friend's house.
Yeah.
Because it's not a password that my kids easily know.
Right.
And, like she asked, and so I was like, well, yeah, and my dad had said, well, it's because we want to give them 1 extra hour. And when I got it back, it was,
Right. Yeah.
where's all my limits? Where's all my, so I have spent 3 hours going through each of their tablets, putting in all of the restrictions, everything back onto these
Yeah.
tablets. And I'm like,
And some of that could be, especially with the Amazon Fire system, which I love. That's actually a really great ecosystem for kid-friendly, controlled tablet use. Is that the parents may not necessarily, or the grandparents may not necessarily know how to work within that ecosystem. So the easiest thing for them was just to turn it off, which lends it to other problems. So yeah. Yeah, Krista.
Sorry.
That's all right.
One more comment.
Yeah.
One, I was gonna say, we often, when, not just we, our family, but I think just in culture, we all kind of think, oh, these are good restrictions for our boys.
Right.
But really, our girls, it's not such a big deal. But our girls are getting inundated as well.
Uh-huh.
And they end up places that, again, like your 10-year-old didn't intend to go.
Nope.
And then they're like, whoa, where did I just land?
Yeah.
And then they're in it. And
Yeah.
I have great, great kids. But I've had them come to me and go, I did not mean to be here. And yet here I am and I need
Yeah.
help.
Yeah.
And that's with our restrictions in there.
Right.
And so, that was one thing I was gonna say. And the other thing I was gonna say is, we've talked a couple times, and you've even mentioned a couple times, maybe it's too late, and I had an experience last summer where I hadn't been taking my kids' phones in the evenings at night, and because my older kids, I didn't have to. And, I came upstairs at 2:00 in the morning, and one of my kids was FaceTiming someone.
Yeah.
And it was on a weekend, it was in the summer or something like that, and I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
This is happening. And, I ended up taking them, and do you know that student has gotten better sleep? I mean, it's
Yeah.
really been
Yeah.
better for that kid all around that I'm doing that.
Yeah.
And it was a struggle when I decided to do it, but yet it's been helpful to them
Yeah.
in huge amounts. So even if it's late,
Yeah.
start it.
Start it.
And
Yeah. Do it
even
now.
when they say you're the worst person and you hate me and
Yeah.
you've never trusted me.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
why can't you
Yeah.
trust me? Do it anyway.
Yeah.
Do it anyway.
Yeah.
That's our job.
Yeah.
But all my friends get it.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Everybody
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
No one else has restrictions on their stuff. You're the bad parent. You don't trust me. Yeah, do it anyway.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Like Krista said, it's kind of like growing a tree. When was the best time to plant a tree? 10 years ago. When's the next best time? Which is right now. So, you haven't. Don't give up. So if you need to start these things today, even if they're 17, even if they're 18, do it today. Help them build those pathways. So, all right. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jason.
Yep.